This story begins June 28, 1893, around 2 o'clock in the morning with brakeman James T. Bruce, of Sacramento. He was stopped at Gold Run to refill the coal supply for his train, when he saw some tramps. They had attempted to stow away on one of his cars. Upon seeing them, Mr. Bruce barely spoke his words to them, when a pistol was pulled, and he was shot right between the lungs. Though 3 men were arrested, it seems that this was not the end of the story. Fast forward to 3 days later, to July 1, 1893. The headline from the Daily Morning Union read: "The most atrocious murder ever committed in this city occurred last night about 10 o'clock. 3 times elected town marshal was shot and killed while serving as sheriff of Nevada County, California. William Henry Pascoe, sheriff of Nevada County, was killed. The shooting took place in the yard of Lakenan's foundry about 10 o'clock. 5 shots were fired. 1 bullet pierced the heart of the sheriff, and he was killed instantly. The murderer is supposed to be a tramp who shot brakeman Bruce at Gold Run. Shortly after the shooting, a man was seen rapidly running up Bank Alley to Auburn Street. Sheriff Conroy of Placer County and Marshal Denon were at the depot when the shooting occurred. And there found Sheriff Pascoe, face downward, lying on the ground, with his revolver under his body. It was found that death was instantaneous from the bullet, which entered the heart. The body was taken to the home of the deceased on Washington Street. Denon, Constables Townsend, and Richards, and night watchman Shoemaker met in Mr. Riley's office and came to the conclusion that the tramp, who shot brakeman Bruce, was still in this city, and they planned to hunt him up. Sheriff Conroy of Placer came from Reno last night, and told the Union reporter that he was certain the tramp must have come this way, as every part of Placer and adjoining counties had been scoured. 3 chambers of the sheriff's pistol were empty. The powder marks on the body where the bullet entered indicate that the shooting was done at very close range. Constable Richards was interviewed by a Union reporter and said, "About 9:45 Sheriff Pascoe called me out of the Pacific Saloon and pointed to an individual leaning against one of the awning posts, asked, 'Do you know that man?' And when I answered in the negative he told me to look good. About that time, the man moved down Main Street, and we followed on the other side of the street. The suspect stopped at the striking machine, and Pascoe went across to get a better view of him. I then crossed the street and stood as if watching the machine and, upon looking around, saw the suspect and Pascoe moving down the street, Pascoe following in the rear about 20 feet. I immediately followed about 50 feet to the rear of Pascoe, and as the stranger came to the road leading to Lakenan's foundry he turned and seemed to increase his gait. Pascoe also increased his gait. The tramp went around the foundry, still followed by Pascoe, and I remained at the entrance near the foundry to head off the tramp. Suddenly, I heard a pistol report, followed by 3 others. Looking in the direction of the shots I saw a man approaching me at a rapid gait, and after he passed me I commanded him to halt. He increased his speed and I aimed and fired 1 shot. I retraced my steps and came up the street after assistance. Met Officer Denon and together returned to the scene of the shooting. I thought the tramp was secreted among old iron about the foundry, and made a thorough search for him. I could find no trace of him, and we proceeded around the foundry by the path taken by Pascoe when we came across his dead body. During the entire affair, I did not hear 1 word uttered by Pascoe or the tramp, and did not have the least idea that he had been shot. When Pascoe first called me out of the saloon, he told me he had the tramp spotted and said that he answered the description of the tramp who had shot brakeman Bruce at Gold Run. About the sheriff. William Henry Pascoe, sheriff of Nevada County, was aged about 52 years and was a native of Cornwall, England. For many years he was a director of the Union Hill School. 5 years ago, he was elected marshal of this city, serving until he was elected sheriff of Nevada County last fall. He was a man in every sense of the word. He was loyal in the discharge of his duty, and ever true to his friends. No man can say aught against him, Never did he knowingly do a man injury. His death will be deplored by the whole people of this city and county, for his popularity was unbounded. Those who knew him best loved him the most. We all sorrow at his death. The deceased leaves a wife, 4 sons and 2 daughters. One of the sons, William, is at present in Montana, the rest still live in the home. A posse in pursuit. Deputy District Attorney Riley and Deputy Sheriffs Douglas and Neagle started posses out in every direction about 1 o'clock this morning. Among others who went out armed with guns and pistols were Samuel Blight, C. Davy, Night Watchman Shoemaker, Henry Shoemaker, William Scandling, William Martin, R. Hillman, W. Brockington, Joseph Taff, Mr. Hetling and about 20 others. A widow grief-stricken. October 16, 1896. Mrs. Mary Pascoe of Grass Valley, a victim of melancholia. The widow of the late Sheriff, W. H. Pascoe, of Grass Valley, committed suicide this morning while visiting her sister, Mrs. John W. Mitchell. About 3 years ago, Sheriff Pascoe was killed by a train robber named Fredrick, who had attempted to rob a train and had killed the brakeman named James Bruce. Fredrick made his escape but was caught and was hanged about a year ago for the murder of cashier Herrick of this city in San Francisco. Her husband's tragic death produced a shock from which Mrs. Pascoe never recovered. For some months she had been subject to Mount Melancholia. And it was for the purpose of trying to break one of these spells that she came to this city to visit her sister. Mrs. Pascoe was particularly impressed recently with the news of the killing of Sheriff Douglas in Grass Valley, which were under circumstances similar to that of her own husband's murder. It was brought to her mind more visibly than ever, the cause of her grief, and she became more subject to melancholia. At the inquest this afternoon, John Pascoe, son of the deceased, said his mother's health had been failing ever since the death of his father. She suffered from nervous prostration and, frequently, went off by herself and cried for long periods. He had frequently remarked to his sister like he thought his mother would lose her mind. This morning, his mother went into her son's room and caressed him. She called him her darling boy and said he was the pride of her life. On a table in her son's room was a revolver. As his mother left the room, she took it and concealed it beneath her apron. She at once went to the back porch, put the revolver behind her left ear and fired. Death was instantaneous. Mrs. Nutty E. Mitchell is the niece of the deceased, said that Mrs. Pascoe had suffered considerably, and the doctor stated that she had a touch of congestion of the brain. Mrs. Pascoe was a native of Newcastle, England, but has lived in Grass Valley for many years, and has raised a family of 7 children, all of whom lived at home with their mother. After the inquest, the son accompanied the remains to Grass Valley where they will be interred beside those of her late husband.